Get going, and we're going to get going in just a minute. So we're going to give another minute for people to start joining.
Recording in progress.
Good evening. Good evening. For those of you who are just joining, it's great to see some familiar faces coming on tonight. Hello, hello. At ISP, we pride ourselves with starting and ending on time. So we're just going to give other folks a minute to join, and then we will get started. Thank you all for joining this late evening, this late evening session. For those of you who have joined, if you feel so moved, we'd love to hear kind of where you are location-wise, and maybe how you heard about ISPU, or how you found out about this project, or what your interest is. Just anything you'd like to share in the chat box about what brought you here tonight. That would be great. All right, shout out to Atlanta. Where else are people coming to us from? Silver Spring, right up the road from me. Toronto. We've got an international crowd. This is great. Thank you all. So I think we'll get started just in the interest of time. I'm sure this is the tail end of a long day for many of you. So welcome. Assalamu alaikum. My name is Meira Nagaz, for those of you who do not know me, and I really have the absolute pleasure of serving as the Executive Director of the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding, better known as ISPU. And I am joined tonight by three wonderful colleagues and partners, all of whom I will introduce in just a minute. But I want to first thank you all so much for joining us tonight, and for following, supporting, and partnering with us to further our work and get us really one step closer to an America where Muslims are both thriving and equal. This is the second in our current series of Fireside Chats. And really our goal in doing these was to have an informal opportunity for people in our network, people who've heard about our work, to just peel back the curtain a little bit and get a behind the scenes look at some of our projects, our work, and our organization, away from the sort of formal webinars with which we usually release our data and have discussions. So today, the plan is that we're going to start with some information sharing about the project that we want to highlight tonight, and then open it up for questions and discussion. So, please think about what questions you might have or what you'd like to share. You're welcome to put those in the chat box throughout, or you can wait and I'll give you guys a signal kind of when we're wrapping up the conversation part, and you can pop them in there, but I'll be monitoring the chat box. So a couple of things just before we get started. We are recording this. Jennifer, I just want to make sure that it is actually being recorded.
Yes, it is. Yep.
Okay, perfect. We are recording this mainly to share with other folks who registered. We had quite a lot of registrants, and I know some of them were unable to join, but they really wanted to listen into the conversation. Please keep yourself on mute unless you are talking or you're one of my colleagues who will be speaking tonight. But you can come off mute later when we have conversation if you'd like to share something. For those of you who've just joined, if you feel like it, we'd love to hear sort of what your name is, where you're calling in from, and sort of what brought you here tonight. What are you interested in learning about, or what's your purpose for being here tonight, if you feel like putting that in the chat box. So before we dive in and I introduce my friends who we'll be conversing with tonight, I just wanted to provide a little bit of context. I think most of you probably know ISPU's mission is really to support informed dialogue and decision-making on all things related to Muslims in America, right? And that can cross community development issues, public policy issues, health and well-being issues. We kind of research it all. And across all of that. And over the 20 years, we've really built up a strong body of research, both for and about Muslims in America, including collecting some demographic information, which we'll talk about in a minute. But from that, we know that Muslim communities are among the most diverse, if not the most diverse faith group in the country. And there is no majority race or ethnicity that makes up Muslim communities. And many Muslims live at the intersection of overlapping identities. And in our research, we really strive to reflect that diversity and the total uniqueness of many Muslims' lived experiences. So this year, we're really diving deep into some of these nuances. What does it look like to be a minority within a minority, and explore what, sort of the unique challenges and opportunities and joys are of living at these intersections. And one of those projects is the project we're going to be highlighting tonight, the Native American and Indigenous Muslim Stories Project. And really the aim of this project, or at least, what we wanted to look at, is what are the lived experiences of Native American and Indigenous Muslims, both within the broader Muslim community and within Native American communities. So this is what we want to talk about tonight. This is one project situated within a much larger context, but it's a really, really exciting project, totally unique project, and we want to tell you all about it. So I am joined today by three amazing people. One such amazing person is Zeba Rahman, and she is the director of the Building Bridges Project at the Doris Duke Foundation for Islamic Art. We are also joined by Brennan McDaniel, who is the principal investigator and lead researcher on this project, and is really, the one who's in the trenches listening to all of this and analyzing it. And I'm super excited to hear from him about what he's finding. And Maha El Simbawi, who's our research project manager, one of two at ISPU, and she is leading all of the day-to-day work on this project. So without further ado, I am actually going to start with Zeba, our wonderful partner. And I want to ask you, since you, quite frankly, were the spark behind this idea, can you tell us a little bit about how this came to you and why you thought this was really important to study?
Well, first of all, thank you and welcome everybody. I'm really excited to be here, and Mira, thank you so much for inviting me to join you today. So I was thinking back to this time when I was looking at an ISPU report, and in it I found a chart by demographics, and I noticed that there was a sliver for Native American Muslims, and I was really excited and intrigued. And
sorry, I'm just going to try to pull up that slide. Yeah,
pulling up the chart. That's great. Thank you, Mira. Mm-hmm. It was this chart, and I was amazed. And so I went online. I started looking around to see if I could learn anything more, and I found that there was really nothing. And that was the point when I actually called Mira, and I talked to her, and I asked her what she knew, and we both decided that it was time for a research study to really learn as much as we could about the community. So I was very excited when she agreed to have ISPU lead the study, and here we are today.
That's great, Zeba. I remember that, and it was pre-pandemic, so it's been a long time in the making, this project. Maha, you work on this day to day, right? As the research project manager, sort of leading the charge. Can you just briefly describe, for people who are not familiar with this project, what does the research actually entail?
Sure. So the research is actually very rich, and so far what the data collected is very deep. And it adopted a qualitative analysis. So we use one-on-one interviews with Native American Muslims to explore issues like their Native identities, their Muslim identities, how they feel in their communities while having these multiple identities, what are their struggles, what are their hopes and dreams. And from these interviews, professional storytellers develop narratives of our participants. And this part will be released on Thanksgiving week, specifically on November 21st. And we are currently conducting focus groups to better understand the context in which the Native American Muslims live and how they are viewed by their community. So this is basically the research.
And Maha, just a plug, because I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you are still looking for Native American focus group participants. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah.
So for anyone on this call who may have contacts that they would like to share that with, where can they go to learn more about that?
So there is a form on ISPU website that they could just click and fill in the interest form. And it automatically comes to us and we can screen them and contact them.
Okay, so maybe Maha, can I ask you to put a link to that form in the chat box, just
Sure.
in case anyone would like to share this with people that they know, or if
Sure.
someone on the call would like to participate themselves. Yeah,
Of course. Do
great.
that.
Brennan, the principal investigator, you've really been deep in doing this research for probably a year now, I believe. And, I'd really like to hear first about some of the challenges and opportunities that you may have encountered while conducting this research so far. And I know you're not done yet, but what has that looked like up until now?
Yeah, thanks very much, Mira. Hi, everyone. My name is Brennan. Like Mira said, I'm the principal investigator on this project. I'm Melungeon from East Tennessee, Saponi and Catawba descent. I've got all kinds of folks here. My dad, my brother over here, my advisor Zarina's here. Got several friends, so I'm really happy to be here with all of you. Yeah, there have been sort of a number of challenges in sort of first embarking on this project. The demographic is very hard to reach, right? Like there's no central organization of Native Muslims really anywhere. But fortunately, that's given our team the opportunity to really be creative. The project has also, started amidst the pandemic, so we've had to really kind of refine our methods to reach a wider audience online. And thankfully, that's produced no shortage of responses. Yeah, one of the more immediate challenges, and one of the things that was very interesting for, I think, the whole team was difficulty in participant recruitment when it came around the use of the word Indigenous. We learned that word sort of circulated differently within the American Muslim community, right? Often in contrast to immigrant Muslims. So the word, tends to mean native born, right? Rather than referring to Native peoples, members of sovereign nations here prior to colonization. And so we were sort of confronted with, what it meant, to sort of, delineate who counts and who does not count as a proper interview participant. But fortunately, there are all sorts of, an abundant resource list on, sort of what it means, for each community to sort of decide who its members are. And, sort of going through informal and kind of formal networks like that, we were able to sort of get a robust group of participants. And it kind of confirmed a hunch that I think we all had, right? That the Native Muslim community, being part of perhaps the most diverse Muslim community, are themselves too, a very diverse community coming from tribal nations, from all parts of the country. We were surprised too that, many are converts, but many are not. So there are in fact multiple generations of Muslims within Native American communities. And yeah, I think that pretty much sums up sort of the more initial responses. And like was mentioned too, the first stage of the project we're conducting interviews, and then the second stage of the project that we're moving into now involves focus groups, where we hope to learn more about just for example, what Islamophobia looks like on a reservation, or, these types of questions that folks, just because of how Indigenous peoples in Islam have tended to be placed at a distance from one another, there's simply no data that exists to sort of, explain these kinds of things.
Thank you so much, Brennan. I'm wondering, just as a follow-up to that, what opportunities you've also come across. I know just from the people who've sort of reached out to us so far about this, that there really does seem to be an appetite to connect further. And I believe that initially when you were trying, and correct me if I'm wrong, but when you were trying to recruit participants initially, it took a while, but now actually that word has gotten out, more and more Native American Muslims are sort of, kind of raising their hands. So can you tell us a little bit about some of the opportunities that have arisen as well from your conducting this research, or just things you've seen over the past year?
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing that was sort of talked about universally among our interview participants was the desire to connect with other Native Muslims. The majority of them had not met a single other Native Muslim in their lives. And within the project already, we've sort of seen folks connect with each other. So our interview participants are hanging out with each other at powwows. They're sort of reconnecting and sort of establishing their own networks. So for the project to have served both as a way to sort of spread awareness about, a community that just remained, prior to this completely sort of invisible, and hearing that, that's generally how each of our participants felt, to not only raise awareness that they exist, but also that they have, unique struggles and sort of needs, and also aspirations and joys. And then to sort of bring them together and to kind of get those networks that they have sort of been longing for has been sort of an unexpected perk of the project. One thing that's pretty fascinating too is that we've learned that Indigenous Muslims as a whole are very well informed about their own tribal histories, about their relationship to Muslims within the broader United States. And it was very interesting too that so much of their identity was rooted not in this kind of conflict that we would imagine, right? Like even sort of the project assuming that, that Native Muslims are indeed, a deeply minoritized group, that for so many of them it was so effortless, and that Islam was just sort of naturally a part of their Native identity, that it fit so seamlessly, that there were all kinds of conflicts that were perhaps imagined going into the project that so many of our participants just didn't seem to struggle with, or it just seemed, that they had already accepted this as part of, simply what it meant to be Muslim and Indigenous in 2022.
Yeah, so you've started answering my next question a little bit. I realize that we're not planning to publish this research quite yet. We still have research to be conducted. As Maha mentioned earlier, the first tranche of this research will be released the week of Thanksgiving, so the week of November 21st. But is there anything you can sort of share? And sorry, the larger analysis from all of these interviews and focus groups will be released in the spring of 2023. So unfortunately, you're all going to have to wait a little while before you can dig into this more. But is there anything you can share with us now preliminarily about some of the things that you're finding, some common threads?
Yeah, definitely. There was a pretty overwhelming response within the folks that we've interviewed that that both their communities knew very little about Islam, and that their mosques or that their Muslim communities knew very little about Indigenous peoples. And many of them expressed discrimination on both sides, whether that was sort of, a lack of understanding on Islam and its attendant Islamophobia, or, within Muslim communities, sort of how Native communities or Native non-Muslims are viewed, right? Often, using terms like mushrikeen, or sort of, trying to place them within sort of a religious context that is more familiar to them. So for the majority of them, they sort of felt overwhelmed in trying to sort of, serve as the spokesperson for sort of both of their communities on either end, right? We did sort of notice that the majority of them, did not regularly attend the same mosque, but they were perhaps sort of, sort of more mobile, sort of attending mosques, kind of just depending on where they were. And yeah, but at the same time, you know, there's sort of a willingness to kind of connect, you know, still with it, you know, that their sense of belonging sort of extends to, you know, wanting more inclusion within their mosque communities. And one of the issues that came up was that they often feel invisible precisely because of the sort of issue I mentioned earlier with language too, that, you know, there seems to be, according to our participants, a general misunderstanding in the broader American public too, just about who Indigenous peoples are. And yeah, it was surprising that so many of them were involved in activism too, this just sort of seemed to be kind of an effortless part of their identity too, that they were involved in various social movements, very, you know, different causes at different scales. And yeah, you know, I think that the project has very much been, you know, we imagined it, I guess, less to be or more about sort of dispelling rumors, myths, and stereotypes. But, you know, in the majority of our participants, you know, their struggles sort of exceeded, you know, simply rumors or myths or stereotypes. It was very much about sort of a lived experience of not feeling, you know, native enough for their native communities and not feeling Muslim enough for the broader Muslim community.
That's great. I can't wait for this to come out because I'm sure that's just the tip of the iceberg of what you're sort of learning. I will tell everyone who's on the call that I have one more question to pose to Zeba, Brennan, and Maha, and then we'd love to get to any questions or thoughts or suggestions or comments that you have. So for those of you who'd like to put those questions or anything else in the chat box, please, you can start going ahead and doing that. Otherwise, I'll open it up and you can come off mute and ask a question or share a thought, but just wanted to give you a heads up that we'll be doing that in a minute. So my last question for me, before we take questions from the audience, is, you know, ISPU's tagline, we take very, very seriously, and that is research making an impact, right? And we are an applied research organization. We really hope and mean to put this rigorous research into the right hands, right? And by the right hands, I mean anyone who can make a difference in the world. And we really hope that people will pass the baton, so to speak. So I'd like to hear from all three of you actually about what you hope the outcomes might be from this research once it is released into the world. What are you hoping happens after we share it more widely? And anyone can start. If not, I will call on one of you.
I'll start and just say that I'm so excited that we're all going to learn together, and that I hope this information, the stories that come out of this research and information gathering can be shared really widely, both within the Muslim community, so that those who belong to the community, and I include myself in the community, can really learn, can really understand Native Americans and connect with them and welcome them into our community so they feel fully as though they belong. And also, it's a great opportunity to share their stories and information with the broader community and to really amplify those stories. So it's my hope that we'll be able to disseminate this information as widely as possible, and then to pull up stories and really elevate what you found. So it's a great opportunity to learn, and I'm so excited.
That's great, Zeba. Brennan and Maha, would you like to share anything? What are your hopes and dreams for this project?
So I echo what Zeba said. I too hope that both will understand each other more, so the Muslims will be able to understand the Native Americans more and vice versa, and that they do not feel alone or strange, that they are merged in the society as well. And I remember one of the participants said that he hopes that people also start reading about the history of the Native Americans more, so get more knowledge. So probably this will also shed some light on this issue, and people will start having more information and more informed interactions together.
Right.
Yeah, and I'll just echo everything that Zeba and Maha said too, that, you know, at the start of this project and, you know, still, you know, one of the things that we perhaps get on a daily basis, right, is the question of whether Native Muslims exist. And, you know, one thing that I would like is sort of, you know, kind of taking all of our interview participant suggestions, you know, to heart, and sort of, you know, as Maha mentioned, right, you know, that thinking through Indigenous Muslims and sort of what it means, you know, in the broader history of the United States, or rather that history being recalled shows that Muslims and Indigenous peoples have a very long history on this continent, going back hundreds and hundreds of years. And it was pretty surprising just how quickly, you know, that thread started to unwind, you know, just even in our first interview. And I think it does sort of gesture to the need to sort of get a broader understanding of, you know, the history of Islam in North America more broadly.
That's great. And you know, Brennan, you talked earlier about how some of the interview participants really hoped and have already put into practice sort of being more in touch with each other, right? So that's been one thing. And we've also seen, we've started to see, before we even released this project, just because we've told people that we're doing it, we've already started to see people from outside, you know, these communities asking, you know, wanting to be more inclusive and wanting to connect with Native American Muslim communities. And so that's also sort of a byproduct that we've started to see, and hopefully that will help sort of focus, you know, conversations a little bit more in a nuanced way around what it means to be an American, what it means to be Muslim, you know, how to sort of be more inclusive in everything that's happening. We have some exciting leads of places that we may exhibit this project, because one component of this project is sort of a photo narrative piece in addition to the in-depth analysis. And we're already in conversations with a number of places where these exhibits might happen. So if anyone on this call has any suggestions of places where we may want to share this information, places who might want to hold an exhibit or have us come and present, or anything like that, whether it's in person or virtual, please be in touch. I will actually pop my email address in the chat box, because we'd really love to hear from you if you have any suggestions as we start planning the next phase of this project and getting it out into the world. So with that, we would love to hear from you. I know there are a couple of questions in the chat box, so I'm going to start there. But after that, if people feel more comfortable, you know, just raising their hand and asking a question verbally, that's totally fine too. But the few questions that have already been asked, one from one of our scholars, Louise. Good evening, Louise. Have you found any regional clusters or patterns, any differences between urban versus non-urban? She says, I recently read that a majority of Native Americans live in urban areas. So have you found any sort of differences?
Yeah, thanks so much for the questions, by the way. And first to Louise's, yeah, I similarly have heard that, demographically that most Native peoples now live in urban clusters, largely the Bay Area and New York City kind of being the top two. At least in our research, we didn't sort of see any majority whether an urban or rural or reservation populations. But I would say that the one thing we did encounter is that every participant is sort of, highly mobile in that regard, right? So that if they were living in an urban setting, that they were very in touch with their home communities and often went back several times a year. Similarly, those that did live on reservations or those that, lived in more rural areas still, engaged in a lot of, cosmopolitan activity, often going to cities, traveling abroad. some of our participants had spent considerable amount of time in the Muslim world, right? We had one who ended up spending the better part of her life in Saudi Arabia. So just, it was very interesting that the sort of urban-rural divide, that these people, being Native and Muslim, that they were so connected to their homeland, but also so, internationally oriented rather, and sort of very well traveled. And yeah.
That's great. Another question from the audience from Kasser in Silver Spring, or up in Maryland. Curious to know how most Native American Muslims first encountered Islam. Is there sort of a common thread through that?
Yeah, so I think with one family in particular that we interviewed, it was actually 2 generations of Muslims at this point. So they had actually learned it just through their family. But throughout that, it was still kind of, similar to how I learned Islam, right? That it was just sort of through family, through friends, through marriage, that the majority of Muslims or the majority of Native Muslims that we interviewed rather, sort of found their way to Islam just through kind of, their social lives, which was very interesting, yeah.
Right. From Jordan, sort of specifically about our methodology to some degree. So, and I can't remember, Maha and Brennan, if we actually started recruiting and started the research. I think the pandemic was already happening, right? We didn't start beforehand. Yeah. So the question was, what were your methods of recruiting participants before the pandemic and then before switching to online? But we kind of always did this online because we started as the pandemic was ongoing. Have you found it easier to connect with more widespread communities geographically, and how has that informed your research? So I guess the question is around sort of using the virtual universe to do this research.
I can answer this one. So I think that this is the beauty of social media specifically, because we were able to reach out to our participants through the social media. So Facebook, Twitter, I'm believing also Instagram sometimes. So that has given us opportunity to reach more widespread geographically communities spread in different geographical places all over the country. So that was a very good opportunity for us to reach them.
Have you found any tech issues? Has that been a barrier at all, just participating online?
Not really. Probably the only thing that if people didn't show up, which didn't happen quite frequently, but it did happen. But other than that, actually, I read a lot of research that the Zoom, for example, or any online meeting platforms, it gives people the sense of comfort because they're in their living rooms or in their own homes. So actually, it gave our participants more comfort to share their information, to share the data, to share their general selves with us. So it was a very positive experience, I would say, for this research.
Great. And Dr. Zarina, who we are so thankful to for bringing Brennan to us. So thank you so much for that, Zarina. And Zarina, for those of you who don't know, is an absolute early pioneer and one of the foundational members of ISPU. So we have a lot to thank Zarina for. So her question is, have you found Native Muslims are connected to larger Indigenous organizing and movements, whether land back or other political issues?
Yeah. Hi, Zarina. That's a really good question. And actually, it kind of gives me a good leeway to sort of make a quick shout out to Nida Ahmed, who is here. She's a research assistant with us on the project. Nida's research is actually on Indigenous Muslims in Australia, and she found this to also be the case, that Native Muslims are sort of very involved in these kinds of organizing movements. at least within our participants too, it just sort of, the way that they talked about Islam and the way that they talked about their native identity, it was sort of always kind of wrapped up into their kind of activist work. And this kind of looked, it looked like, folks going to Standing Rock, there were folks, articulating very wide support across the board for Black Lives Matter. And then there were also a number of causes that sort of seemed unique that I can't quite recall right now, but, sort of smaller regional, struggles and movements. Some were, hoping to also run for policy positions. Some were very active in organizing within their community and, hoping to join tribal council and sort of, lead, community specific efforts for things like that. But yeah, it was surprising that, it was such a key part of every single participant's life almost.
Tarek, I know you have your hand up. You've been waiting so patiently. If you want to unmute and ask your question or share any thoughts.
Oh, yes, thank you very much. So good evening. I'm joining in from Ottawa this evening. And thank you very, very much for sharing your experience with this very interesting project. It's particularly interesting for me as I recently joined the Institute for Religious and Sociopolitical Studies, where we do similar research projects with Muslims and Islam in Canada, including embarking on a research project with Indigenous Muslims in Canada. So I'm very happy. I would be very happy to connect with you as well. And I look forward to reading the results when the time comes. And thank you very much for your efforts. And I'm happy to hear about such projects, spreading the word about them. And I also am happy to hear about the projects in Australia as well. Ultimately, this would be hopefully in service of the Indigenous Muslim communities. I have two questions, if that's all right. My first question is for Maha, if that's all right. You mentioned that primarily the project started with one-to-one interviews, and also now you're exploring focus groups. I was wondering if you could share your experience on sort of the pros and cons of each method, or if there was something that you noticed in one-on-one interviews that or focus groups that was limiting, or what sort of inspired you to go to focus group to try focus group method. And I have a question for Brennan also, if that's all right, that you mentioned that one of the and it's very interesting for me, this point, that a lot of the Indigenous Muslims, they were not aware of any other Indigenous who was Muslim, and the lack of sort of Indigenous Muslim circles or organizations, despite the fact that, online methods and creating such groups is more facilitated now and can transcend the geographical barrier. So why do you think this is the case? Thank you.
Thank you, Tarek. So we're in the process of recruiting for the focus groups. So we did not yet start the focus groups, but we are in the process of collecting participants for the focus groups. For the one-on-one interviews, I think I cannot think of anything that's actually negative. Everything that they were connecting very well with the interviewer, and the one-on-one actually gave them a lot of comfort to share their stories and their inner feelings, and it was actually very very positive and great, and we collected a lot of data from this one-on-one. What we're hoping to focus on the focus groups specifically from the non-Muslim Native Americans' perspective. So what do they think? Like also Brennan mentioned, is about other religions. So specifically target these areas for the focus groups. So yeah, I hope I answered your question. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks again for your questions, Tarek. Yeah, it was sort of surprising for us, over and over again to hear that, some of them had not met any Native Muslims before. The only ones that sort of were connected were in the same family. And even that was sort of surprising for us too. And this is particularly surprising given that there are, in Mexico, for example, there are entire indigenous communities where they all converted to Islam, whether they're Ahmadiyya or sort of other missionary movements that have taken place in Latin America. And we generally don't see that up here for some reason. And, we did, Maha can attest to, sort of looking through different social media groups. And we kind of, went on every popular social media platform and tracked every kind of imaginable hashtag, Native Muslim, underscores, any variation of that, and still found no real informal networks. And we're not really sure why, other than perhaps, geographical distance, sort of, just a general lack of awareness around how many Native Muslims may exist. Yeah, but as we've sort of talked about, hopefully that this, project can also serve as a, a starting point for kind of getting a North American network of people together.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tarek. And please do connect with us, especially since you may be doing research in this as well. So you can either write to our info@ispu.org or my email's in the chat box. So thank you. Dr. Amina, I know you've also been patiently waiting. If you'd like to.
And I missed the first part of the conversation, but I wanted to ask, with a lot of minority groups, where is the quid pro quo? I mean, where are non-Native Muslims supporting Indigenous causes? I mean, I was up in Alaska a little bit ago, it's been a little bit, talking to Inuit Muslims, and they have a tribal thing going. So they're not likely to talk to another tribe that's not a neighboring tribe, even if it has Muslims in it. But I wanted to know, where's the quid pro quo? I mean, we're studying people like they're bugs under a microscope, and they can answer all of our questions, but where is this, how is the study designed so that it answers their questions about support from all the other Muslims?
Brennan or Maha, I'm not sure if either one of you has thoughts on that.
I would say that probably this research was not specifically, that was not the goal of this research specifically. So we wanted to shed some lights and to discover more. So let's say probably it's the start of the research that could follow, hopefully, after our report. I think that maybe I'm not sure if I quite understand the second part of the question. So Dr. Amina, could you elaborate a little bit on your second part of the question?
I'm just asking, on a number of occasions, I've sent students to speak with, talk with students, went out from DePaul in Chicago to help with the Muslim students, to help with the protests about the pipeline. They didn't see any other Muslims there. I mean, at some point, it can't be we only focus our research in one narrow vein. At some point, there has to be a quid pro quo, where, why don't you know about them? They've been around for ages. We've not supported them in any of their social protests, largely. Our organizations do not have them on boards. You haven't hired them as researchers. I'm just saying, and I'll shut up.
Yeah, thanks so much, Dr. Amina. being both Native and Muslim and kind of going about this project, the kind of protests that I imagine back home in Appalachia, you are right that, we don't see Muslim non-Natives kind of participating in these movements in the same way that Natives sort of participate in movements for, towards ending discrimination and Islamophobia in the American Muslim community. We hadn't really sought out, to sort of, or rather one of the goals, at least explicitly, has not been to organize Muslim non-Natives. But, I do, like Maha mentioned, I do hope that this project can kind of serve as that foundation too, right? That, part of spreading the awareness that Native Muslims do exist is also a call for the American Muslim community to recognize that as well, that the majority of our participants felt invisible, not only in the broader American public, but specifically within the Muslim community themselves, or itself rather. So yeah, that's a point that, very much well taken and something that we've observed as well.
But when you shine a light on them because of heavy government surveillance, it has in the past caused them a lot of problems.
Sorry, who's the they? Are Indigenous peoples broadly?
Yes.
Oh, sure. Yes. That has been sort of my family and community's experience as well. And, within the project, I sort of would, kind of speak against this idea that we've put anybody under a microscope, but rather invited them to sort of co-facilitate and lead, and, that they're very much have been our interlocutors rather than research subjects, right? That they are the ones kind of being agentive here and carrying the project along. And yeah, this has generally been how the trend's been going, at least as I've seen it.
Julian and Cliff, I know you have, oh, you're you're clapping as opposed to having your hand up. Does anyone else have any comments, questions? This is really helpful, and I'm really grateful for all of these great questions and thoughts and comments shared. If anyone else has anything they would like to bring up. Okay.
This is great. Thank you all.
Thank you so much. Yeah, we really appreciate all of this. This is sort of the first time we're talking about this publicly in an interactive way. Just for all of you to know, there is a podcast available that Brennan, we have a podcast series called Deep Dives with ISPU. There is a podcast that's available that Brennan did really early on. I think, Brennan, it was months ago that came out. But that's available where you get your podcast. If you look for Deep Dives with ISPU, you should be able to find that. Look out the week of November 21st for the first output from this project. And I believe we're calling it Faces and Places, and that will really be the photo narrative component of this, this project. And then in the spring, the deeper analysis will come out. I really want to thank Brennan and Maha for their amazing work, and not just Brennan and Maha, but the research team that has been working so hard and so diligently on this project for many, many months now. So thank you all so much for the work you've put into this. I wish I could thank all of the participants in this research. I will thank them, even though many are not here. I also really want to thank Zeba and the team and Linda at the Building Bridges program, and just the Doris Duke Foundation for Islamic Art generally, for both catalyzing and supporting this work and being a thought partner. And most importantly, or just as importantly, I want to thank all of you for coming. I really love these fireside chats because it gives us an opportunity to hear from you, to sort of share what we know and what we're learning and get great feedback. So I really appreciate everyone listening, and also everyone who asked a question and just provided some very helpful and thought-provoking feedback. So thank you so much. And thank you for following ISPU. We're really, really grateful. Thank you very much. I hope you all have a wonderful evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Mira. Bye.
Thanks. Good night, everybody.
Right.